So it looks like we are going to our third talk. Today we are going to skip the the AI movie to think about. Maybe not everyone knows, but we have in most of our events, we have a short AI movie that we present and we think about this movie afterwards. But since we have three engaging speakers and we are part of ITCS today, we decided to skip the think movies, but we have basically two philosophical and societal talks today that are going to make us think. So our last speaker today is Nikola. He's running a show in Canada about future. He's interviewing lots of people about various aspects of future. Technology is a big part, but it is not the only one. AI is a part of the technology that he is asking people about, trying to understand what's going on in our world. And he will tell us today some of his ideas about technology. So Nikola, please go ahead.
Thank you, Danko. I hope everyone can hear me well. Welcome and thank you for this opportunity. Perhaps the most popular and maybe even the most dangerous myth about technology is the myth that technology allows us to see the future. Come and see this amazing new technology, we often hear, and you will see the future. That's the promise that we're usually given. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard this particular promise before, but I would venture to guess that many, if not all. And I call this the crystal ball myth. It's named the crystal ball because many of you are familiar with the fairy tales that many of us in Europe grew up with, where we had those witches and wizards who had those magic crystal balls, which allowed them to see the future. Of course, Arthur C. Clarke's famous third law of prediction states that, quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, end of quote. And so perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that modern technology has become indeed synonymous with that crystal ball from those old fairy tales of ours. Today, however, I want to argue that the crystal ball perception of technology is a myth, and it's a dangerous myth at that. So, to evaluate the crystal ball metaphor, we have to first understand the etymology of the word technology, what it means and what it actually stands for, or at least what it used to mean and what it used to stand for. Then, and only then, can we actually judge whether the etymological meaning of the word supports such a metaphor about predicting our future or allowing us to glance and to see our future at all. And then, perhaps we can consider some alternatives that I will propose. So the word technology comes from two Greek words, techne and logos. Techne means art, skill, craft, or the way, manner, or means by which a thing is gained. Logos means word, the utterance by which inward thought is expressed, a saying, or an expression. So technology literally means words or discourse or a conversation simply about the way that things are gained. In other words, technology is merely how we do things, and it's not why we do them, and it's not what we should be doing in the first place, because it is not an end in itself, but instead technology is merely a means to an end. It is a tool, no surprise there. And here I want to propose to you a little bit of a different metaphor that I believe is a lot better in capturing both the original etymological meaning of the word, but also its modern nature. So I say that technology is a magnifying mirror. It doesn't show us the future, but it merely reflects the present, and most importantly, it reflects who we are. Technology is a mirror because it reflects the engineers, the designers, the programmers, and the users who make it and who use it. but it is also a mirror to humanity in general and our collective dreams, our hopes and our fears, our knowledge and our ignorance, our strengths and our weaknesses, our good and our evil. But this is not a usual kind of mirror because technology magnifies and amplifies things, so it always has unforeseen consequences. And the critical point that differentiates the magnifying mirror from the crystal ball metaphor is that technology does not have an essence of its own because it merely reflects our essence. Now, why do I claim that the crystal ball image is dangerous? Well, the result of believing in that crystal ball image is that something that I believe we can already observe actually, and namely that's the fact that most tech conversations today are techno-deterministic. That's to say they focus exclusively on fixing the technology while ignoring the fact that it isn't produced in a vacuum. Technology comes preloaded with our political, social, evolutionary, and cognitive biases. In other words, to use my metaphor, focusing exclusively on fixing the technology is like looking into a mirror, not liking the image that we see, and then trying to fix that by polishing the mirror. What I'm proposing here instead is that we have this process upside down. Instead of focusing on the technology, perhaps we might want to invest some more time and resources, and perhaps even most of them, on improving ourselves instead. That is asking the question who we are being, what we are doing, and why, most importantly, why we are doing it in the first place. Therefore, what I'm proposing is that in the end of the day, it is really not about technology. At the end of the day, it really comes down to us. Because you can have the best possible how, the best possible tool for a job, but if you mess up your why or what, you will end up doing more damage than good. And that is why technology is not enough. It is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And there are many, many, many historical examples of how better technology did not make our lives better, but it made them worse. For example, historian Yuval Noah Harari called the agrarian revolution, quote, history's greatest fraud, end of quote. Because in every way measurable, health, longevity, work hours per week, nutrition, infant mortality, even our size, we were better off as hunter-gatherers than we were as farmers. And today, the reason why the predominant myth is dangerous is that I believe that if we're not careful, we're running the risk that our current technological revolution may actually turn out to be our epoch's greatest fraud. And you can see that nowhere better than Silicon Valley in general and Facebook in particular. Take Silicon Valley. The way that many startups begin is usually by some new technology that they don't know how to use or apply yet. In other words, they start with a how. For example, in the case of Google, their how was a new search engine algorithm called PageRank. Or in the case of Facebook, they had a platform that allowed nerdy and horny freshmen to rank the sex appeal of the profile pictures of their female colleagues. Then, usually after some kind of angel or venture investment, startups begin to seek places where they can actually apply their how and monetize it. But this is like putting the cart in front of the horse, where the cart is how we do something and the horse is why we actually have a cart in the first place. And when we have the cart driving the horse, in other words, when we have people serving technology instead of the technology serving people, then we get the kinds of results that we've got. Take Facebook, for example. After pivoting from female student pictures to a student social platform, Facebook became magic. Many experts and tech gurus like Peter Thiel said that Facebook is the future. That's the crystal ball myth that I'm talking about. It was a magic utopia where everyone could socialize with everyone else everywhere around the world, both easily and for free. What could go wrong, right? But then Facebook quickly became manic because we realized how addictive it is, how it feeds our worst impulses, how it makes us more and more attention deficit disorder, and how it makes us obsessive compulsive. Eventually, with the Cambridge Analytica revelations and the Myanmar genocide against the Rohingya minority, we even realized that Facebook is becoming monstrous. And it is not hard to see that most technologies since the Industrial Revolution either already follow a similar path from magic through manic to eventually monstrous, or are at least in danger of doing that. And that is, of course, because we, humanity, we are magic, manic, and monstrous. And technology merely reflects us. Examples are endless, but I personally can't think of a better example than plastic. You see, in the early 20th century, plastic was literally marketed as the magic material. It was called the magic material because you could do almost anything out of plastic, but you could do it faster, cheaper, and easier than ever before. And so very quickly, we took this magic material and we became manic and manic obsessive with it to the point where we really started building nearly everything out of it. But today, it is not hard to see that we are actually neck deep in the monstrous stage of that technology because whole areas of our oceans contain more plastic pieces than fish. And to give you a tiny example of just how bad it has become, check this out. Today, currently, we produce 1 million plastic water bottles per minute on our planet. Now, what is worse is that at best, only 9% of those ever get recycled. So that means that the other 910,000 plastic water bottles per minute end up in the environment, most of them in the ocean. And of course, water bottles are a tiny, tiny little fraction of the total plastic production on our planet. So it is no surprise that we are drowning in this originally magic, then manic, and now monstrous technology. Today, it is hard not to notice that a path from magic to manic and eventually monstrous can also be observed in most of our existential challenges. Things such as climate change, nuclear weapons, or plastic pollution are just few examples. So, going back to our original topic here today, the question is this: why would artificial intelligence be any different? There are many cases where we can already see that AI risks going from magic to manic to monstrous, where we can already see that AI does not help us discover the future, but only to discover who we are. Take, for example, Tay. Tay was an AI chatbot created by Microsoft in 2016 that was specifically designed for Twitter and launched to a fanfare of promises, including the claim that looking at Tay and chatting with Tay is like chatting with the future, seeing the future embodied in Tay, right? Well, in 12 hours, Tay became racist, xenophobic, misogynistic, and sexist. In 16 hours, it got so bad that Microsoft had to shut it down. So talk about machine learning and the ability to predict. So what I'm suggesting here is that it is not necessarily about the AI, not even about the AGI, artificial general intelligence. It is perhaps most of all about the I. And the I, of course, stands for intelligence. The I stands for us. We are the I. We are the cake. The artificial part is just the icing on the cake. So all of those who are warning us, like, for example, Elon Musk, Bill Gates has done that, and many others, all of those who are warning us about the existential threat posed by artificial intelligence are both misunderstanding and worse, misrepresenting the issue, because the dangers come not from the artificial part, but from the intelligence part. Look around the world today, and you would see what I'm talking about. You will see that humanity is the greatest threat to humanity, not some artificial and not some alien intelligence. So we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us, because humanity is the greatest threat not only towards us, but towards all life on our planet. We are currently living in the so-called sixth extinction, which is why Yuval Harari calls Homo sapiens a mass murdering species. This is also why techno-solutionism is so dangerous, because as Dr. Matthew Cole says, every time that technology tries to stand in for ethics, we do ourselves a disservice. We deny ourselves the opportunity for growth. To continue our previous conversation here, if we're trying to monetize doing what is right, then what's the difference of just following the best business model or following the money, right? You're not being ethical. You're just making money because you're following the money before that and you're following the money anyway after that. So that's no break with the past. A break with the past in ethics is all about doing the right thing, even if the money is not telling you to do the right thing, even when it comes at a cost. Now, many will argue that technology does help us solve problems. I don't deny that, not even a little bit. I love technology. But I'm adding an extra layer to this by saying that technology, while necessary, is not sufficient, especially when it comes to the significant issues that we're facing today. Take global warming. We know the science, it's pretty uncontroversial and conclusive. So we know what's the right thing to be done there. And we do have most, maybe even all the technology required to move beyond things like fossil fuels and meat consumption, for example, which are two of the most damaging factors to our environment and also our health. And yet we're not taking sufficient action. Some of us are hoping that someone else would give up driving an SUV. Others are hoping that they don't have to stop eating meat 3 times per day. Or others, even more, are hoping that artificial intelligence will come and
Human
solve-
behavior.
Excuse me? And others are hoping that artificial intelligence will come and solve not only climate change, but also all of our problems. In other words, our civilization is like an alcoholic with a failing liver, and technology offers us the hope that we can 3D bioprint a new liver just in time while failing to acknowledge our self-destructive habit and our responsibility, thereby failing to address the actual problem rather than simply alleviate the symptom. It's like hoping to win the lottery. It's not impossible, but it's almost certain that we won't. And even if we do win the lottery, then what? It will only provide more time, but not necessarily a long-term solution. And so many of us sit and wait and hope for science and technology to come and save the world. And we're getting in the meantime, or some of us at least, both fat and lazy, and we're eating and driving ourselves to death, both personally and collectively. So we're destroying ourselves and the planet, and we put our hopes and fears in things like God or science and technology or artificial general superintelligence. Some people say our techno deity, that is to say, science and technology will come and save the day. Others will say, like Elon Musk, well, the wrath of godlike artificial general intelligence, which is almighty, omnipresent, all knowing, and all powerful, will come and destroy us. And we keep telling ourselves this convenient story, this convenient lie, so that we can keep avoiding an inconvenient truth that humanity is the greatest threat to humanity, that humanity is the greatest hope of humanity, and maybe the only hope of humanity. Not some omnipresent, all-knowing, almighty force residing outside of us, whether you call that God or AI. No, it is us who are the most powerful force on the planet. We are the real destroyers and we are the real creators. We ought to take both the credit and the blame for where we are today and all the problems that we consequently have. It is us who are driving the train currently towards the train wreck. Therefore, only we can move our foot off the gas pedal and hit the brakes to save ourselves. So we shouldn't wait for AI to come and save us, to tell us to not do the wrong thing. You see, technology is pretty good at giving us what we want, but it is terrible at giving us what we actually need. It is good at supplying information, even knowledge, but it's terrible at providing wisdom. It helps us live easier, more comfortable, and longer lives, but it does not tell us why we should live or what to do with our lives in the first place. Most importantly, technology does not make us happy. There is no app for happiness. In fact, during the current pandemic, we're using more tech than ever before, and we're more unhappy, more depressed, and more suicidal than ever before. So while artificial intelligence may help us get whatever we wish, it is only wisdom that helps us figure out what we should want or what we should not want in the first place. Intelligence can be useful only in that case, because lacking the wisdom to know what we should and should not want, but having the intelligence, it doesn't matter artificial or biological, to get that thing is a path towards self-destruction potentially, if we want the wrong thing. That is why all the significant existential challenges that humanity is facing today, be it climate change, environmental destruction, nuclear weapons, soil erosion, species extinction, plastic or other toxic pollution, ocean acidification, they're not different. They're all exactly the same very thing, which is to say, it's the same problem playing itself out over and over again. Namely, the problem that humanity's technological power is, at least currently, far surpassing our wisdom to use and to control this in a productive, safe, non-destructive, and non-suicidal manner. So that's why I argue that we must go back to the original meaning of the word technology. Technology is merely a tool, a means to an end. It's never an end in itself. It is useful as a crutch, but as with all crutches, we can become slaves to its use unless we condition and develop our own muscles and our own strength. It can therefore enable just as much as it can disable us. And so, while technology may be the path towards our salvation or the path towards our destruction, in the end of the day, it will not be the reason why we end up there. And that is why we always have to start with why. And the why is ethics. The how, the technology, is only needed later, only after you've already figured out your why. So to sum it up, what I've argued here today is simply this. Technology doesn't help us see the future. It only allows us to see ourselves. And if we put garbage in, we're going to get only garbage out. Only this time, it's going to be exponential. So the same would apply to human stupidity, prejudice, or outright evil. Therefore, we can't fix technology unless and until we take responsibility and start working on fixing ourselves first, because technology is a magnifying mirror, not a crystal ball. Thank you.
So, questions? Yeah, I have one question, Nikola. So, what do you advocate at the end? Should we use technology in a manner that we know how much we should use, or we can use it, but then later we kind of build some general ethics that would control how we use it?
So what I advocate for is, first of all, can you hear me? I think I'm losing the connection here.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. So first of all, we have to be a lot more cognizant with the proper process of using technology. So technology is a how. It's not a why and it's not a what. It's how we do things. It's a tool. So before you, let's say I want to accomplish a certain goal, a specific goal in my life. Say I want to move this pen with a robotic hand, or I want to move this pen from here to here. Now, there's a million ways of accomplishing that goal. One of them includes artificial intelligence. One of them includes a robot. There's infinitely other many ways that can accomplish the same goal. One of them is the easiest way of me grabbing the pen and putting it here. Today, we live in a world where artificial intelligence, just like, by the way, cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin, are now the magic dust that we sprinkle on everything. It doesn't matter whether we need it or we don't need it. Machine learning is going to solve everything that we ever need to know. That's the idea. You know, Demis Hassabis, his original motto at DeepMind was solve intelligence, right? Even he was forced a couple of years ago to admit that despite the incredible accomplishments with respect to chess and Go and many other kind of closed system problems, when it comes to general open system and the world in general, he was over optimistic, and so far deep learning has not delivered what he expected it would deliver. Even he admitted that, right? And the problem, and just to connect with Sasha, my skepticism towards his approach and general machine learning. So it's a brilliant and very useful approach, and it can provide enormously valuable insights to data which has already been categorized. In other words, machine learning shines and works best when you have like. So you have an inherent bias in machine learning where nothing needs to change in a major way. Machine learning wants us to stay the same, for everything to stay mostly the same, because it has modeled something from the past. And then if you have a new data point coming in, it has to say this data is like that data. But if that new data is completely new or not controlled, connected in any way to the old data, it doesn't have a way to connect it. Therefore, it's very useful to have machine learning when you have no radical change, no paradigm shift, when you have a closed system like chess, like Go, like a very consistent market. It's very useful. But when you have a fundamental revolutionary change, when you have a black swan, when you have a data point which connects with nothing that's in the database, machine learning is useless. And what I'm saying is that our future is a result of our past. But every once in a while, the major breakpoints in history happen where we have paradigm shift, where we have a radical fundamental change. And if you only rely on machine learning, it cannot quantify or characterize or qualify that change because it has nothing to connect it with. It's a black swan, it's a new event, it's a paradigm shift. And that's where we have to be very cognizant about the limitations. That's why, as a futurist, theoretically speaking, there's inherent limitations to machine learning. It can give you lots of insights from the past about the past, which are very valid and statistically helpful for the future. But they don't guarantee that the future would happen exactly like that. Think about it in personal sense. Let's say I eat junk food and I don't do any useful work, and I just watch stupid YouTube videos every day. The algorithms are going to feed me the same stupid YouTube videos and junk food ads and all that stuff because they want me and they expect me to never change in my life. So the inherent bias is that they want me to stay the same. And if I do change, if I say, forget it, I'm going vegan, I'm not touching any of the junk food I was eating before, I'm changing my life entirely, machine learning algorithms would be shocked because that's a fundamental break with my past. So, And that's a silly and small way to say that, you know, the big changes in human history usually happen with a paradigm shift. Like, for example, when we went from the hunter-gatherer society into the agrarian society, which was, according to Yuval Noah Harari, the greatest fraud. Now, going back to close the loop of your question, I'm not advocating we forget technology. I love technology. We cannot survive as a civilization without technology. You know, 8 billion people of us live here and survive because of technology. So the fact of the matter is we have to deal with it. But what we need to do is fix the process. And the process is the process of the why and the what as starting points and the how as a tool. And it's best represented in Silicon Valley, and you can see the results there as the examples I was giving. Many of the most successful companies like Google and Facebook and YouTube started with a how, and then you pivot until you find a way to monetize it. That's fine. You can make billions and trillions of dollars like that. But the question is that then you're optimized only for making money. You're not optimized for making a difference, for doing the right thing, or making people learn or having progress. You know, YouTube can say, well, people learn on YouTube, but the YouTube algorithm would look at me and would say, oh, you eat junk food and you watch stupid YouTube videos. That's all we're going to play for you. The flat earth YouTube videos, because you've seen 10 flat earth videos, we're going to keep showing you another 100 flat earth videos, because the past would predict the future. There you go. So I would never come out of that loop. I would never come out of my bubble. You know, if it's up to the algorithms, if it's up to machine learning, there's that horrendous inherent bias. And I'm saying is that we have the agency. We can break that bias. That's why machine learning, while being very useful for statistical analysis of the past markets, often has huge problems at major breakpoints. And I think I'm curious about Sasha and saying how effective machine learning was at predicting the 2008. I'm sure it was kind of giving you a pretty good indication, perhaps. And yet everyone who is using those machine learning algorithms was kind of like shocked and surprised, or most everyone, let's say. Right? So yeah, let's leave it at that.
But just to point out something else, those people, those big shots, let's say you named Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and so on, they advocate not to have such a huge progress on utilizing AI, such advances. On the other hand, they themselves are selling the licenses and putting their own AI technologies in their cars or in Microsoft's own product, for example. I mean, how is it that they are advocating not to go further, at the same time they are actually selling it? What do you think about that?
Well, that's what we call basic conflict of interest, don't we? Right? It's like putting
yes,
the
we do.
fox in charge of the hen house. And that's why I'm saying most of the things that we know, things like what should we do with data in terms of privacy, what should we do with climate change, the science is very clear. It's not controversial. The data is spanning at least 100 years, a whole century. We know the right things to do. But the question is, if it's not monetizable, let me give you a problem with the market right now. All the markets are allowing people to short climate change. All the markets right now, it's more beneficial if you're a hedge fund and you know where to place your bets to short us being able to resolve the issue of climate change effectively. In other words, it pays to the big sharks in the market to bet that we would fail as a planet and as a biosphere. I think it should pay instead for pay them and everyone for us to win, but for us to be to have a healthy and prosperous biosphere. That's what I mean to win, not financially, but as a biosphere, as a whole ecosystem, right? But in the case that that's not possible, and there's a whole debate about the Green Deal and whether, you know, saving climate change or solving climate change could be economically prosperous or not. I believe it could. But even if it couldn't, let's say for a second and it couldn't, then what should we do? Should we just give up? Should we just say, well, forget it. It doesn't pay, therefore we're never going to do the right thing. And the same applies with GDPR, with privacy. The same applies to plastic pollution. The same applies to nuclear weapons. Someone would say, look, it takes $1 million to disarm and dismantle a Russian nuclear missile. And they have right now 10,000 nuclear warheads. They used to have 30,000. Now they have only 10,000, which is plenty to kill us many times over. But it's $1 million to disarm one of them. It doesn't pay. It's just economically, there's no business sense for dismantling nuclear weapons. Well, forget it then. Let's just let them stay lying around, you know? But that's the economic analysis is such a tiny fraction of the proper analysis of nuclear weapons. And I think the same applies to climate change. The same applies to any of the major problems that we are facing today as a civilization. Artificial intelligence also being one of them. Because if you listen to the economic incentive and economic analysis, if we're trying to monetize AI, then it may be the case that the only way you can monetize AI is if humans are products. If we are, the products that are being traded, and that's what we're observing right now. So if you can't change that kind of monetization model, then we should be stuck with it. What I'm saying is, no, we have the agency. We are the why. We can change the incentives of AI because we are still in charge, at least until it becomes self-aware, which may not be anytime soon, hopefully. So until and unless, for as long as we are the programmers, we bear the responsibility. So garbage in, garbage out. You can't blame the algorithm. It's not the algorithm did it. I programmed the algorithm, therefore I did it.
All right, thanks. I tend to agree with you, I have to say. But James had a comment. He wrote a little longer comment. But James, can you unmute yourself and rephrase yourself?
Well, I'd like to say, firstly, hello, Nikola. And I've listened to many of your Singularity podcasts over the years, and they're always fascinating. And thank you so much for those. It's always very insightful. And please keep up the good work. There are so many things, and it's always so much food for thought, what you're saying. So I have literally hundreds of questions I could ask you. I think my point listening to the presentations today, and something I'd like to throw in there is a little example. Years ago, one of my first projects was I worked on a computer system for the Channel Tunnel when it was open between the UK and France. And we had to monitor the size of vehicles that would go through the tunnel and direct them into lanes. Okay. So amongst other things, we wrote this wonderful system, which sort of with sensors to measure the height of the vehicles and things, and then with a series of lights to direct the lorries and the cars to the right lanes and things, which in practice, the people who were driving the vehicles completely ignored. And that was the UK solution. I was living in the UK in those days. The French colleagues put a bar at the right height. So if a lorry tried to drive through it, it would take the roof off. And the point I'm trying to make is we had this technology, which was sort of in its infancy with sensors and computer systems and things, which was wonderful. And we were looking for a problem with which we could solve it. And machine learning is a tool, which is wonderful. But I think we as a society are just learning what it's capable of, and what we need is to understand that better and then apply it where it is needed. Yeah, and we have the society within which we are living is a Western capitalist monetarist society. But what we can do is we can use politics and also learn as humans where its application has been good and where it hasn't been, and we can use our political and intellectual influences to knowledge to influence society to apply it where it is needed and where it will hopefully make things better for us. So that's a lot of things. I'm not sure what you'll take from that, but I'd be very interested.
Let me grab the last sort of line of thought. You said we live in a Western capitalist society. So I view political systems like people. They're born, they live, and they die. So we had the hunter-gatherer society. It was great for its day. Then we had the agrarian revolution, and we had the migration from hunter-gatherers to sedentary farming society. Then we had feudalism. Then we had the industrial revolution. Then we had capitalism. In other words, evolutionary speaking, the only thing that's certain is change. So now you can be like the academic that's most hated on my podcast, Francis Fukuyama, and you can say, well, the Soviet Union collapsed, it's the end of history, because not only our social and political and economic system is the best that we have ever created, but it's the best that ever could be created. I'm in complete denial of that idiotic hypothesis. If one thing is certain is that change happens. We evolve. So do our systems, right? And that means that capitalism, as useful as it was for the 20th century, is not going to be here forever. In fact, I would argue that the first 21 years of the 21st century have given us plenty of evidence that the old narrative, the old story of capitalism is literally falling apart. You know, the 20th century can be characterized as a battle of three stories, three narratives: fascism, communism, and capitalism. Fascism died, eventually communism died, capitalism thrived and prospered and declared, triumphantly the end of history. I'm saying that's not the case, so that will change. And we live now in a technological revolution of all the times. And we know that, as Marshall McLuhan said, first we change the tools, but then the tools change us. So there's this feedback loop, right? So it only makes sense to me that when we go from, let's say, industrial revolution to an information processing computing revolution, we're going to have different socio-political narrative or story or system that would allow us to address the issues of the 21st century. Now, doesn't mean we throw out capitalism completely. We can retain many of the useful parts of capitalism, but it's certainly not going to be the 20th century shape and form, and it's going to have many, many new elements which break revolutionary new ground. And that applies to markets, by the way. So machine learning is very useful for old school markets, and provided that we change nothing, also for the future. But it looks like so far the past narrative is failing to provide solutions to our current problems, like climate change, like migration, like plastic pollution, like species extinction, like nuclear weapons. We cannot get any insightful solutions from the old narrative. Therefore, we need a new narrative, we need a new story, we need a new socio-political system within which the solutions to those can arise and can be implemented. It doesn't look like the current system is allowing that to happen, right? Therefore, if you can't solve the problem with the old thinking, actually Einstein said it's idiotic to think that you can get out of a problem with the same thinking that you got into with, right? So you have to have a new thinking to solve the problem, and that's what technology does. It keeps giving us new problems. It solves an old problem, like locomotion. We don't use horses anymore, we use cars. Internal combustion engines, great. But now we have the new problem of, CO2 and all kinds of other gases gathering in the atmosphere. So we need, yes, a new technological breakthrough, but most of all, we need to realign our priorities on why we need, first of all, locomotion. Can we replace much of it like we are doing right now, all of us? and what's the actual final outcome that we're going for? Is it simple locomotion, or is it optimizing our biosphere, optimizing our planet for the most efficient and most prosperous state that we can envision? So it depends what you're optimizing for, right? So if you're optimizing for monetizing, then at best you're going to get monetization right before the end of the world. And that's, if you look at where we're heading, it looks like it's like this. The stock market are exploding. They're higher value than ever in the history of humanity, despite the fact that we are in a terrible pandemic, so much unemployment, so many people suffering, migration, natural disasters, you name it, terrorism, all kinds of problems. And yet the stock market is prospering. That goes to show you that it's totally disengaged with the health of our planet. And to me, that makes it near useless, right? And that's why if you're obsessed with a measure like the stock market, you're going to miss the important picture, the bigger picture.
Well, it's hard to say anything.
I apologize.
No, it's fascinating, and thank you very much. It's always wonderful to hear your ideas and yeah. Thank you.
If I may comment, I always keep thinking while listening to you and to these ideas. Do you have some ideas what we need to fix? Not abstract idea, like don't do this, but what do we need to do it better, to do it right? What is it like, when you criticize...
Could we also frame it for the entrepreneurs on the call? I mean, I absolutely hear a lot of like huge changes that need to happen in our society, but we have a group of entrepreneurs here that are designing the products of tomorrow. And so to me, I think big change happens in small places. And so, what are the changes that the perspective that these entrepreneurs need to take when they're thinking about their new products?
So perhaps you should start by the definition of what is an entrepreneur. Here's my favorite entrepreneur, Gandhi. If you measure him in Silicon Valley terms, he's a no one. He's a joke. He had a pair of glasses, a pair of old dirty wooden slippers, and a loincloth. What an entrepreneur. You can put all his possessions after he was dead on a little table like this. That's it. Ridiculous entrepreneur, right? But if you redefine impact, not as measured by money, but as measured in lives changed, is measured as impact in other terms, in non-monetary terms, then that could be a great example of entrepreneurship. And in my view, it totally is. In fact, every big history shifter and changer, whether it's, and I'm non-religious, but whether it's Jesus, I don't care, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Galileo, Copernicus, any of
Marx.
Sure, whoever you want who changed the world, whether in positive or in negative ways. Hitler too, he was an entrepreneur, and they're all self-made, They started from nowhere and ended up somewhere, maybe destroying the world almost, like in the case of Hitler, or maybe saving it almost, like in the case of Gandhi. But so first of all, we have to start with why. Why do I want to be an entrepreneur? Is that does that mean that I'm going, and how, and then you go with like, okay, do I measure my success with money, or do I measure it with impact, or how? Because entrepreneurs are very powerful people and they have great impact. You can say great things from entrepreneurial point of view about not only people like Pinochet, but also Mark Zuckerberg, Larry and Sergey, great examples. The question though is, when we draw the net line between positive and negative, take a lauded entrepreneur like Mark Zuckerberg. If you draw the bottom line and ask yourself, is Mark doing an overall negative impact on the world or an overall positive impact in the world? Now, you answer that question for yourself, right? I don't want to give you my answer. But if you measure it in money, you would say, clearly, he's on the positive. His company is the most monetizing and profitable venture in the history of entrepreneurship, in the history of business. There's never been a more profitable business venture, period. Right? Despite everything, they just declared 80 billion profits, despite all the scandals twice per week, all the pressure, all the issues that happen every second or third day with all kinds of apps, all kinds of problems constantly. You know, the genocide in Burma, in Myanmar, against the Rohingya was entirely powered by Facebook. Most of the coordination, even between the forces that were going and ethnically cleansing certain of the Rohingya villages, was happening over Facebook chat. Most of the people who called on to cleanse the Burmese nation out of the Rohingya minority came over Facebook, you know? So what I'm saying is it all depends how you measure it, and you are in charge of making that decision about how you decide to measure whether you're successful as an entrepreneur or not. And that stems from your answering of your question, why? Why do I want to be an entrepreneur? Do I just merely want to make money, or do I want to make a difference? Because they're not the same thing, and often, not always. There's many cases where you have great entrepreneurs, and Bill Gates actually is a good example of people changing. When Bill Gates was in the 80s and the 90s, he was a total Mark Zuckerberg. He was a take no prisoners, anything goes kind of guy. And then suddenly he became this amazing guy. Let's go vaccinate the world. Let's go save everybody. Right? So people do change too. People can change. We all have that power. That's why we have agency. And AI doesn't have agency. Technology doesn't have agency. We do.
Thank you. Good points. And I think it's worth mentioning that you know, to bring a Silicon Valley name into it, I think Ben Horowitz's book on, you know, what you do is who you are. I think he delves into some of those points and talks about, you know, values are just what you say and virtues are the representation of what you do. But I like how you brought the why into it. You really need to think about that why before you go and decide what it is that you're going to use your efforts towards. It's a good
Absolutely.
point.
And that's not my point per se. I want to stress that I didn't invent this process. This is the meaning, the etymological roots of the word technology. This is what the Greeks meant, you know, 2,500 years ago when they coined the term. So we've lost it in the midst of time, sort of for the last 2.5 millennia. Unfortunately, we've lost it. So now we've gotten to the point where technology has become an end in itself. But properly, technology is just a means to an end. It's just a tool. So we shouldn't worship technology. We should use it as and whenever it's fitting to do so.
So if I may jump in. So you have answered what an individual should do. I think you answered it really amazingly well. But what is do you have some wisdom what a society should do? Right?
Oh, yeah. Okay,
it's not just society is not just individuals. There is also something we do together.
Right. So yeah, thank you for reminding me that. I forgot about that part. So basically, I'm working now on my second book, which is called Rewriting the Future: How Our Story Determines Our Future. No, it's called Rewriting the Human Story: How Our Story Determines Our Future. And so the human story is a story that's, with every revolution, is being rewritten. So a story is an information processing technology. It's a way in which we make sense of the world. It's a way in which the old generation used to transmit their knowledge and their information to the new generation back in the day when we didn't have writing, usually around the bonfires, and it was information about the migration of the animals, fresh water, the change of the seasons, and things like that. But Those stories that we're being told and that we learn tell us not only who we are, but they tell us where we're coming from and where we're going. They tell us what is right and what is wrong for us to do, what could be allowed to be done and what couldn't be allowed to be done. So every major socio-political economic system, like hunter-gathering, like agrarian society, feudalism, industrial revolution, comes with a major story that comes attached to that system. And every time you have a revolution, there's a break in the narrative. There's a break in the story. The old story doesn't work anymore to give you an insight into the new world, into the new changes, but you need a new story. So let me give you an example. The French Revolution. We used to have the story, the predominant narrative right before the French Revolution was that the king had the divine right to be the king and to rule the world. And all his subjects were arranged with respect to the will of God. And so that was the divine order of the thing, of the world. And so you couldn't rebel against it because you're rebelling against God himself. That's the divine order. And for as long as that narrative, people believed that story, everything was fine. But overnight, literally in a span of, a decade, with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, of course, that story didn't make sense anymore for people. And people literally overnight rebelled, guillotinized the king, guillotinized most of the nobles, and we had the French Revolution. And then we had the necessity to have a new story. Combine that with the Industrial Revolution, and then we had the story of capitalism. First, we have the clearing for the open space intellectually and ideologically for a new story that would explain the new world and provide space for a new socio-economic political system. And then capitalism was born, basically. Now, as I said, capitalism was a useful story until the end of the 20th, early 21st century. So now we need a new story that would not only make sense of us as humanity, but it would tell us where we're coming from, where we're going, and who we are. So now, going back to the previous examples of the entrepreneurship, that's also a great example of a story, because an entrepreneur is a kind of identity. An identity means nothing more than a story. And the biggest battle is always about the narrative, about the story. So you can have the story of what is an entrepreneur. Some would say Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey, and Larry, and Bill, and Jeff, those are the entrepreneur guys. So the entrepreneur story has these and these kind of features, and you can see them all in Silicon Valley. If you're someone like me, you would say, no, that's only one version of that story. But if you look at Jesus, Martin Luther King, Copernicus, Galileo, Gandhi, all the major people who made difference in history, Socrates, all of those were, in a way, entrepreneurs. They started from nothing. They made some kind of a difference. It didn't get measured in money. It got measured in impact. Okay? So now we're coming to answering your question, hopefully, finally. So now the question is, what's the story of the 21st century? A story that would unite us, a story that would tell us where we're going, because a story is not only about the past, but the story tells us where you should go about the future. So if you read the Bible, for example, all major religions are stories. They're a story about who you are, where you're coming from, where you're going, who you should marry, how you should dress, what kind of food you should eat, what is right, what is wrong, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, how to treat your father, how you treat your mother, how you treat your wife, everything. But that story doesn't seem to help us anymore with the new problems we're facing. Therefore, we need a new story. And so now that's the big question. So now I'm working on that as the biggest challenge. It's probably very arrogant of me to think that I can solve this kind of a problem and provide that kind of story. But actually, starting in about a week from now, it's going to be my third attempt to put my thoughts into a book outline. And hopefully by the end of that, process which would take at least 6 months if I'm super arrogant, and probably 12 months. And I would provide sort of my version or my suggestion or proposal or how that story of the future could look like. Because as I said, the story would tell us what's right and what's wrong and where we should go. It would inform our current decisions. So think about it this way. People don't use science and evidence to make choices. People use their story. So if you're a certain kind of demographic in the United States and you have certain kind of conservative story, usually Baptist, Presbyterian, or what have you, and someone gives you a shitload of evidence about climate change, that evidence doesn't fit within your story. So no matter how much evidence you give them, they're going to deny it because it doesn't fit within their story. So if you need to get across to them, you have to figure out a way to get across to them within their own story, and then somehow subversively, I'm saying that in a humorous way, guide them to change their own story. And if you guide them successfully to change their own story, that means they're going to be able to see the same world in a new way. And then they're going to be able to incorporate that new technology, that evidence into that new story. And that would allow them to solve that problem, be it climate change or what have you. And so it's an open question. And please, anyone, that's the biggest opportunity for entrepreneurs. Anyone who comes up with that story that unites Europe and unites Europe with North America and unites the world into collectively addressing climate change and all of the major problems would be the biggest entrepreneur in my books and the biggest change maker and difference maker in the history of our planet, I think. So I don't know exactly. I have many ideas and I'm working on that, but I don't have the simple version of that story just yet, and maybe I never will. As I said, maybe I'm way too arrogant to even think that I could even supply that, but I think it's at least worth trying. And if you try as an entrepreneur, the previous person, or anyone else listening here today, tries that story, there's that vacuum. We live in that historical vacuum today where fascism failed, communism failed, capitalism is failing right now, and we need a new story that would unite us. Because that story would tell us how to organize our markets, what are the incentives for action or not action, what are the payoffs, how we organize our society socially, politically, economically, ethically, and legally, and even religiously. Because that's what the story does. It sets the context within all of which all these interactions are regulated and kind of happen.
Wow. I am officially impressed. You have to come back with the story. So you will come back with the story when you finish book or when you are about to finish the book.
But here's the best part where the smoke and mirrors may be falling apart. I still, after working on this, the book idea I've had 4 or 5 years ago, and I've done 2 attempts to do it, and I concluded that I don't have enough knowledge or I'm not mature enough, and I don't have enough to make it actually happen. So this will be my 3rd attempt. And if I've learned anything is, as Socrates said, I know that I don't know. So I'm really kind of like flabbergasted. Okay, I can get as far as setting up what's the problem. I can convince people that that's what needs to be done. Now, the question is, can I actually deliver on that? Right? And that's an open question. That's an open question. That's not a guarantee, right? And the answer at best is to be seen, right? And some would say that's very presumptive of you and very arrogant to think that you, of all the people, can even come up with something close to that story. But it's also an invitation towards anyone listening, anyone out there. Do your best, do better than me. I'm happy. Like, as I said, I've been struggling with this for the last 3 or 4 years. And even with artificial intelligence in 2004, when I started, with my research and my investigation of issues related to AI, the technological singularity and transhumanism, I thought that in a couple of years after I did my master's degree, I learned something. took me now 17 years to realize, I'm honestly still clueless when it comes to AI, even though I've talked on the record to 270 of the best, quote, best people in the world, like Ray Kurzweil and you name it, from a diversity of fields like Michio Kaku and Max Tegmark and, Noam Chomsky and, Peter Singer from the philosophy world and, physicists, AI experts, Stuart Russell, who kind of is the author of the sort of like the official textbook of, introduction to AI and stuff like that. So, and I still feel like I'm totally clueless, but the problem is, if one thing I've seen is that most of the experts who think that they actually know so much about AI are often equally, if not more, clueless. And that's very dangerous, because to know nothing and to know that you don't know is not dangerous. It's actually very safe. But to know a little bit and to think that you know a lot can be a very dangerous thing. And that's unfortunately where our civilization is right now, collectively. We know so much about so many things in terms of technology and science, but we don't know how to use it. We don't know how to apply it productively, safely, and most importantly, hopefully non-suicidally. So our science and technology is telling us we're running the train into a train wreck, and we're not slowing down. We have the evidence. We know the truck is running out. We know what's going to happen. We know all of that. And yet we keep doing it. We keep doing it. And that's, I guess, part of the human condition.
All right. Okay, so we ran out of overtime quite a bit, which is great. Which is a good sign always. It means that somebody had a good time. But we have to wrap it up soon. There are more comments. Let me read them. So Tate Cantrell said, people don't use science and technology, they use their story. But he's quoting you and says—
I'm quoting Nikola. That's not my statement. I'm just saying that to me as I wrap up. I think that's a fantastic point.
So you're saying that this is the most important point Nikola has made here, right? Yeah.
I think that's an important point, because, I'm struggling with this myself. How do I talk to my relatives in the United States who are Trumpists? How do I talk to my relatives who are climate deniers, right? The other day, I don't know how many of you watched the news, but Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles has been converted to a mass vaccination center. And guess what happened? A bunch of morons with signs, "Save your soul" and "Let Bill Gates chip himself," went and blocked the vaccination line, and the whole thing was closed. Can you imagine that? So you have thousands of people lining up to get a vaccine, and then you have a handful of people who go and block that process, and everything gets halted. While, in the United States, every 8 minutes, an American citizen is dying. Every 2 seconds, a new American is infected. So that problem you cannot solve with evidence. We have the evidence. We've had it. We can bury people with evidence. But they have a story that denies all of our evidence. So our evidence is useless. The only way you can get across to those people is if somehow you get to, within their story, change the outcomes and change the values in a way in which they can start slowly shifting to seeing the world in a different way. And ultimately, to make them really change their outlook on the world is not changing the evidence, but changing their story through which they see the world. Because the world is the same, but different people have a different story, and therefore they see different things as things that matter, things that are important, things that are of value, things that are not of value. So as long as you have that story of like QAnon and they're eating babies, and, in a pizza shop in Washington, D.C., in the basement, there's like this child pornography ring, and Bill Gates is microchipping all the people in the world with vaccines. you know, so that he can control them like zombies eventually, right? As long as these stories are perpetuating, you know, it doesn't matter if a story is true or false. If you ask me, all the major religions are false stories. They're like Santa Claus for old people. But it doesn't matter. Billions of people identify as Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, etc. And therefore they decide what's right and what's wrong, what is to be done and what is not to be done, how we should do it. All of that is derived out of their story of being Christian, Muslim, Jewish, you name, atheist even. It's also another story. It's no difference. Being atheist is a story. And that story makes me take certain decision that a devout Christian facing the same circumstances that I would face, the same evidence, would take a different course of action. Not based on the evidence, based on the story.
Yeah. Zaneta, do you want to fire up your microphone and say what you wrote?
Hello, everybody. This conversation is really, really interesting for me, and all points about the society and using technology and monetizing all the stuff. I think the thing what it's actually missing in all the thing is missing of the information, which it's not really spread well, and people have different kind of view, and they have a different perspective. Not everywhere is understood well that it's mislead and abuse of the information. And well, that's why I just pointed that spreading the information, making people aware, and can be kind of way to change the point of view of people, see the difference, see the dangerous, see the possibilities, and see the right direction. That's my point.
But the information is just evidence, in other words. So you're saying if people have the right information, the right evidence, they would make the right decision. But mere observation shows us that that's not the case. Because as I was saying, again, people deny the evidence, people deny the information. There's plenty of information that the world is not flat. Everyone can attest in endless experiments, in endless ways to confirm the fact that the world is not flat. It's a very easily verifiable scientific hypothesis. Let's say you say the world is flat. Okay, how do I test that? There's a million ways of testing that, or learning about it, or getting the right information. Okay, how many people of those change their minds? So first of all, you have to have a framework or a story that allows you to change your opinion within the presence of new information or new evidence. If you don't have a framework like the scientific framework, which says you change the evidence or the information, then therefore you change the outcome. If you don't have that framework, then you just deny it. Most religions, for example, are that kind of framework which goes against the evidence. What's the evidence that Jesus rose from the grave? We can debate whether there's any evidence about that. How many miracles did Mother Teresa did, like real miracles? We can debate that, you know, and there's hardly any scientific verifiable third-party blind tested verifiable evidence for that. But people embrace that story, and therefore they say these are the things, this is the framework, your evidence is useless, your information doesn't help me. I believe that the world is flat. You show me a picture of the planet from the moon, I still tell you the world is flat.
Yep.
Okay.
So
hello, everyone. May I ask my questions now? I mean, is the right time?
Go.
Right. So, thank you very much. Can you still hear me? Great.
Yes.
So, while I do appreciate Nikola's approach and I understand his connections, I don't know. I would like to ask him about what he thinks or what he believes about AI used in for perhaps automotive and aerospace industry, used, for instance, in full autonomous drones or driving cars that they can drive itself. Because I don't know. I think we now are focusing just on some topics related with some very ethical approach, whereas we might lose the more realistic approach in which we should focus on how we could actually use AI in enhancing our lives. Because I think that, for instance, an AI spaceship or AI engine drives might actually bring us on Mars in the future, or actually can help us solve many of our problems that we are facing now. So yeah, please make a few comments and about what do you think
Are you
on
an
the
engineer,
impact.
Stefan?
Yes.
How do I know that?
I don't know, maybe because of my realistically approach.
Maybe because of that. Also because I have a best friend who is an engineer and who keeps telling me, you philosophers are all bullshitters. When I go to work, I have something to show at the end of the day, and all you do is create pies in the sky all day long. The problem is you can't help it. As Aristotle said, whether you want to do philosophy or whether you don't want to do philosophy, you're still going to end up doing philosophy. Why? Because what you do by definition as an engineer has an impact in the world. And the moment any action that you take has an impact in the world, it has ethical and also political implications. That's why the politics of the future is technology, and technology is the future of politics. I know that's very uncomfortable for engineers, but that's a fact you should probably learn to live with because it's unavoidable. You can never do good, especially powerful engineering. Look, programmers and engineers and software developers today are among the most powerful people. Look at Larry and Sergey, look at Mark. Literally some of the most powerful people. So if you think that the most powerful people's decisions, choices, and technologies don't have ethical and political implications, I'm very worried. I'm very concerned because every decision that Mark makes, every decision that Sergey and Larry do, every decision that Jeff does, every decision that Bill Gates does has ethical and political implications. You cannot escape that. Technology drives change. And by definition, change turns the world upside down. So it takes a perfectly good blue blood nobleman and it turns him into a pauper during the Industrial Revolution. It takes a king and makes him a ceremonial figurehead. It takes a shepherd and makes him, a middle class or a capitalist industrial owner. And that change is always political. It's always ethical. You can't escape it. And the more powerful the technology is, the more bigger your engineering products, the bigger their impact is, the bigger their political and ethical import is. You can't escape that, my friend. So you may want to say, well, science is impartial, engineering is impartial, algorithms are impartial. That's not true. As I claimed, our algorithms, our technology is a magnifying mirror of who we are. It carries our political, ethical, biological, evolutionary, and cognitive biases, whether we want it or not. There's a famous joke about Marvin Minsky. I did probably the last interview with Dr. Minsky before, unfortunately, he died, on artificial intelligence. So two things that stood out there during the interview. One was he denied that we made any progress on artificial general intelligence whatsoever. I quoted him Watson, I quoted him Deep Blue. He denied that those are examples of artificial general intelligence because for him, those are examples of artificial narrow intelligence. And for him, there was no progress made with respect to general AI. So that's one. And the other thing is he said the Turing test was a joke. But anyway, There's a famous joke about Marvin Minsky being criticized by one of his graduate students that Marvin put a particular bias in one of their algorithms. And you know what Marvin's reply was? We know what the bias in this algorithm is. If you take out the bias, the only difference is that then we're not going to know what the bias is. There's always going to be a bias, simply by a matter of orienting the world from a means to an end towards a goal accomplishing action taking process. You're going to value some things and you're going to disvalue other things. That process of valuing one alternative over another alternative is what ethics is all about, what politics is all about. It's also about good engineering, but unfortunately you can't separate it. So let me give you examples with drones, or even better, the engines that you're talking about, the missiles. I interviewed Jan Tallinn, who is one of the founders of Skype. He finished his, at the end of my interviews, I always give the last word to my guests and I ask them, what's the most important thing you want us to take away from this conversation with you today? Jan's answer was, it's all about the science. Science creates the most powerful, it's like creating the most powerful engine for our rockets. And it's going to take us to Mars and beyond. My response to that as an ethicist, you know what it is? It's absolutely not about the engine, because you can have the best possible rocket engine in the world. But if you point that missile, that rocket towards your neighbor instead of towards Mars, you can end up destroying the world instead of saving it. And the direction towards you point your missile, your rocket, whether Mars or the neighbor, is an ethical choice. It's a political choice. And it doesn't matter how powerful your engine is. In fact, the more powerful your engine is, if you're pointing it in the wrong direction, the bigger the damage you're going to do, right? And that's the perfect metaphor maybe about artificial intelligence. If you're working with possibly the most powerful technology of our civilization, or at least as it's, lauded by people like Elon Musk, if that's the most powerful tool we've ever used in the history of our civilization, we might as well know when to use it and when not to use it, and towards what reasons. And that's the question, why? So unless we come up with a synchrony or some kind of harmony of our answer about our values, about towards what goals are we to use and not use artificial intelligence, then chances are it may end up just like nuclear power. You can build, nuclear power plants, or you can build nuclear weapons. You can build drones to do all kinds of good in the world. You can build drones for commercial reasons to deliver stuff, and you can build drones to kill people. The engineering is not different. The engineering is 100% the same. What's different is the why. I want to build military drones. I want to build commercial drones. I want to build drones for an NGO that monitors the black rhinoceros in northern Kenya. I'm making this up, but all of this is the same engineering put to use in a different way. And that stems from the question why. And many engineers want to avoid the why completely. They're just like, I want to do good engineering. Yeah, but if someone takes that good engineering and puts it towards killing people, then are you going to be responsible for that? Do you think, you as an engineer? I think probably you should bear some responsibility. All of us should bear responsibility for the consequences of our action. So if, as I said, garbage in and garbage out, who wrote the algorithm? I think that's important, and you can't escape that, unfortunately. Unless you do something that makes no difference and doesn't work. Then you can be safe, right?
All right, guys, we have to stop at some point. So, and that's the point. So let's wrap it up. We had 3 wonderful talks, and it was like wonderful meetup. And we will repeat it again. Next month, we have next month, another wonderful meetup. It's already scheduled. Already, we have all the speakers. You can take a look on our website. You can register for the meetup. It's going to be great again, like it was today. Are there, no. Are we having the schedule for next one? We don't.
At the end.
March 25, reserve the date. Are there any announcements that are not related to the talks? Any community announcements? Somebody looking for a job, somebody looking for employment, somebody looking for people to discuss AI, whatever. Go ahead. Lots of people have left. We have stayed longer than usual. Thank you to everyone who stayed so long, who kept the attention and interest in discussing it. Are there any announcements?
Thank you very much, guys. That's all I want to say. Thank you very much for staying and for giving me this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure for you and for all the speakers.
Thank you, Nikola. It was nice.
So it does not mean that announcements are coming. So guys, then thank you. Have a great weekend. Good night, and see you soon again. Bye-bye.
All the best.
Bye-bye. All the best to you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay healthy and safe.
Thank you, everyone.